Hello everyone and welcome to the latest episode in Racing Weekly, a podcast and YouTube show brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. As always, delighted to have Sam Turner bright and early today to reflect on what we've seen over the last 7 days in the sport and look ahead, of course, to what promises to be quite an interesting Sprint Cup at Haydock at the end of the week. But first of all, Sam, just catching up on how things are going. And I don't mind if you want to mention football this week because I think Man United... Live contenders again.
I'm surprised you haven't come on with your Manchester United shirt on and, gleefully wearing and sporting a scarf as well, because it's amazing how many Arsenal and Manchester United shirts I'm seeing around the place all of a sudden. They're starting to crop up, and funny enough, Chelsea and Manchester City shirts don't seem so prevalent at the moment, but I'm sure that'll all change as the season wears on.
Well, I quite enjoyed it about a week ago. I don't think too many Liverpool shirts were on view either. That was quite nice.
No, there is always that bonus, of course. I shall keep quiet about my side. Unfortunately, we're misfiring as usual, and I think it's been something like 10 or 13 games or something since we last won a game in the Premier League as well, which is obviously relegation form. But we signed a new striker. Hopefully, they can provide him with a bit of service, because unfortunately, goal scoring continues to be a major problem for us.
The cold list, Sam, the cold list. Just one thing I wanted to mention to you at the top of this show was the excellent Alice Haynes feature that we've been watching, and a lot of people have enjoyed watching. How much did you enjoy that? Because obviously it was a little bit of a treat to be able to get up close and personal to, as you said, one of the rising stars of the training ranks.
Yeah, I'm not sure I got up that close, Rishi, but I kept a respectful distance. But yeah, no, Alice was brilliant, wasn't she? She really, really good value, made my job incredibly easy. Very eloquent, spoke well about the game, spoke well about her career, and the steps that she's taken to try and be successful. So, really good partnership down there with Kieran O'Neill, who's an integral member of the staff there, and obviously rides the great majority of the horses for Alice. And just a really nice bunch of people as well working with her. They're a good team. They all seem to be on the same page. Some really bright and promising horses as well down there. I don't think we've perhaps not even seen the best of them yet. I think there's one or two to come out in the back end, which could definitely be worth watching and keeping an eye on. And she continues to churn out the winners. 40-1 winner at Chelmsford, sort of, a couple of days after we actually, finished the feature, and then a winner when it was released by our boys, and so she's doing extremely well. Keeps churning out the winners, and it looks like it's going to be a very exciting autumn for her as well. Possible trips to the Breeders' Cup and maybe back to France and stuff like that. She's very much a forward-thinking trainer, and definitely one for punters to keep on side. I think good team down there.
Yeah, there are so many exciting young trainers, and she is right in the thick of things. Well done with that, Sam. We are going to take a pause because we're going to set ourselves up for Racing Recap on this week's edition of Racing Weekly. Right, we'll start this week's Racing Recap with a look back at Goodwood. Some decent racing. I think before we just get into it, Sam, just a brief word on the overall quality of racing that we saw on... it was a 3-day meeting, but obviously the Saturday and Sundays when we had the pattern races. A lot spoken about it. The Racing Post in particular, Lee Mottershead, a front page article, pretty damning about the strength, the quality of some of the big races, in particular the March Stakes. What were your thoughts on that?
There were disappointing numbers, of course there were, and I think the course executive are perhaps going to revisit the March Stakes and whether it's actually got a place in the calendar. Unfortunately, there's a lot of money thrown at it. We had a 130 on winner. It was a pretty uncompetitive affair. Now, not all of these sort of stepping stone races. I mean, it's a Group 3 in its own right, but it is sort of a stone on the way to the pathway of the St Leger. So it's used in that respect. And of course, it comes a week after the Voltigeur, which is perceived to be, one of the best trials, and the Gordon Stakes, obviously at Goodwood as well. They already host a very good St Leger trial. So, yeah, whether it deserves that place in the calendar or not, and the money that's thrown at it is going to be open to question. It's a real shame because it's run in memory of John Dunlop, of course, who was a Goodwood stalwart and obviously enjoyed terrific success at his local track. So we'd have to find something else, I think, to run in John's memory. But Yeah, whether it deserves a prominent place in the calendar or certainly on a big race day at Goodwood on that Saturday afternoon. It's not working at the moment as it is. Um, it's something we'll have to revisit, and I think the course executive are very proactive and keen, to try and ensure that that card works a little bit better. We didn't get many in the Celebration Mile as well, unfortunately. That was a select field. And of course, we saw Muta Sabek yet again fail over the mile. It's a bit of a drum I've been banging for much of the summer, really. But I'd really like to see him back over 7 furlongs, where I think he's 4 from 5, and he's yet to win over the mile. And he just doesn't look like he's ever going to, does he?
All right, well, let's start with that race. And you mentioned Muta Sabek, who I think a lot of people really fancy for the race. One thing in addition to the mile, I was chatting to Stuart Machin, who was commentating that day, and he actually said to me, he said the horse disappointed in the race last year, was probably a little bit below par at Epsom as well. And he just had a theory about the horse on that type of track, Goodwood, Epsom.
Yeah.
Whilst I ask you to deliberate that, I'll also ask you about Jadoomi, the winner, who obviously has had his issues, but is now 2 from 2 this season, was quite a talented 2-year-old. I think juice in the ground is important for him, and they've got some interesting targets.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, just to recap the Muta Sabek, I think that's an interesting point that the machine makes there, and he's, obviously a very wise sage, and not much escapes Stuart, as we well know, having worked with him for 20 years. So I think that's a very salient point that he's perhaps picked up on there, and something that I hadn't sort of contemplated. The trip, I think, is
Exactly my reaction as well, by the way.
He's what? Sorry.
It was exactly my reaction. I said, when he said it to me, I said, God, I hadn't even thought of that. I hadn't even thought of that. I'm such an idiot.
Yeah, well, this is why Stuart should be on various committees within racing, but he won't be, unfortunately. But yeah, he's a very good thinker about the game and life in general, to be honest. But no, I think, Muta Sabek, I think the time's to sort of, perhaps rip up what they're doing with him at the moment, and perhaps try back over 7 and just see how he fares. On a more orthodox track as well. Hopefully there'll be a race certainly in the autumn that they can perhaps target before the ground really goes. Although he does cope with a bit of cut, so that shouldn't be an issue. The winner did well, didn't he? He sort of took a couple of false steps coming out of the stalls, but regained his composure very quickly. Led home at Crisford 1-2. Nice performance from him, but it was a pretty uncompetitive running of the race. Escobar's third, who's been well beaten in handicaps this year, albeit he's run to a decent level yet again for the O'Mara team. Yeah. So again, it was a bit of a disappointing race, but certainly wouldn't be disappointed for William Buick, who certainly stole the plaudits across the weekend, didn't he, with a credible 8 winners. Astonishing performance from him, really.
And the quality of the riding as well. I mean, Jadoomi wasn't the easiest horse to win on in the closing stages. He was just leaning over into his stable companion, Finer Sound. I mean, he made the running earlier on in the day with Fairy Cross. Yeah. We will talk about her in just a second. He had to be patient on Jadoomi to try and get that horse balanced in the closing stages. Deft change of hands, change of the stick in the closing stages. And also, when he rode Huyamal, we'll talk about Huyamal in more detail as well, to win the March Stakes, that he was given a task by trainer George Bowie to get this colt settled, get him into a rhythm. So you got the full gamut of his skills on show over the weekend. I mean, and I know we're talking about a man who's well clear in the Jockeys Championship, and he's destined to win it, and he is at the top of his game. But the level that he's gone to this season, it's a joy as a racing fan, I think, to watch it. I mean, your thoughts as someone who's watched the game for such a long time, and jockeyship, the actual technical skills that he's providing in the saddle.
I think, the great jockeys that we see, certainly in my lifetime, can do a bit of everything, can't they? They can be good exponents tactically. They can make the running cleverly. They can finish well from behind. They can time a challenge very well. They can navigate difficult situations. They don't lose races that they should win. And, I think for me, as a pundit and a bettor and people such as me, you just want to see really your horse given the best possible chance to win the race. Now, there's nothing more galling really. You're going to get bad luck in every sport, but there's nothing more galling when you're clearly on the best horse and you don't win. And, that's part and parcel of the game, and experience and time teaches you that that's going to happen to you any number of times a year, and you've just got to suck it up. But I think with William, he sort of does narrow down those percentages where something might go wrong, and like you, I think he's a very, very well balanced rider. You know, he's not whip happy either. He's, you know, very considerate rider. And how he's managing to balance really a huge job with the Charlie Appleby stable, with actually trying to win a title, not getting burnt out, got a young family as well, you know, trying to sort of keep all those plates spinning, I think is really admirable, as well as having time for the media. You know, very high profile position as well. Every ride of his in big races is scrutinised very thoroughly. You know, and he just keeps producing and keeps, well, he's an extremely fit boy as well. I mean, obviously you see pictures and videos of him on Instagram, and he's, you know, forever working on his fitness. Where he finds the time, I just don't know. But, you know, he is very much dedicated to his craft and his art, and you're seeing that translated to the track, I think. You know, things can obviously go wrong, and obviously when you're riding with confidence as well, things happen for you, the gaps appear, you get on the best horses. But I think, you know, in the last couple of years, really, in the last 2-3 years, I think you're right. I think he's stepped up to another level. Probably riding better horses has helped, but he's just the all-round package, really. And I think, you know, he deserves to be spoken of, you know, extremely highly, not just as a potential champion jockey, but as, you know, one of the finest riders of his generation.
And I'll pick up on one thing that you just said there, Sam. You mentioned about, you know, the way he's dealing with it all. Obviously, a lot has been said about jockeys dealing with the pressure of going for a championship and how going for a championship is a real strain. But you've mentioned about the things he's having to do. Obviously, he's a stable jockey to one of the biggest organisations in the world. He's got a young family and he's going for a jockey's title. Yet he has got a very calm, friendly, engaging demeanour. And he has had a laugh when he's been asked questions about, you know, going for the title, the whole pressure and stuff like that. He seems at ease with it all, is the thing that I find most noticeable with his quest for the championship this year.
And I think that was definitely, I mean, it is easy. He's well clear this year and things aren't going too badly. So, you know, you can be calm in those circumstances. But I think what I was more impressed about was last year when he was going hammer and tong with Oisin Murphy. And certainly when things didn't go his way at the end, when they could have done, obviously events conspired against him and he didn't win the title in the end, how he took that, moved on, wiped his face and settled down about putting last year's behind him, last year's result and trying to win it this year. And I thought that took an immense amount of mental strength and dedication, really. It would have been very easy to suffer burnout this year, but he sort of wiped the slate clean. Look, he's got a very good job, but he's engineered that himself. You know, it's his quality of riding that's got him that position. He's not just been handed it. He's a top-class pilot and top-class fella as well. So, you know, great to see him being a sort of a very good ambassador for the sport. And, you know, he always finds time for the media as well, which I don't think is easy when you're in a position of that magnitude. So, all power to him.
Especially when those amongst the media number you and I, for example.
And
Fairy Cross, who won the Prestige. Well, that goes without saying. Fairy Cross won the Prestige, the first race on Saturday. Now, tell me about her, but also tell me about the horse who finished third in that race, who was the real eye-catcher, I felt, in Bright Diamond.
Yeah, I mean, that was another example, really, of you know, Williams' tactical nous obviously set good fractions at the head of affairs on Fairy Cross. You know, Breeze sat on his quarters with Jason Hart, and they finished 1-2, which is pretty unusual in the 7-furlong race round Goodwood, unless they've gone, you know, very efficient pace at the head of affairs. In contrast, Bright Diamond, who was slowly away and then tried to quicken into the teeth of a quickening pace as such on just her second start as well, around Goodwood, you know, which is a very individualistic track, not always the easiest track to remain balanced for an inexperienced horse. And she did that so well, came home strongly as well. And I think she was a wide margin winner on her debut, but I think almost Carl Burke would be happier with this defeat than perhaps the maiden win to open her career, because she would have learnt plenty. She had overcame a little bit of adversity in the race. She'll be a lot sharper for that next time, I think. You know, this was a marked step up in class. You know, she was going into a Group 3 from a maiden win. And, you know, the stats will probably tell you that's a very difficult feat to try and pull off, is to try and follow up a maiden win in pattern company next time out. So, you know, she was taking on some experienced individuals and she finished the race off really strongly without having a hard race. And I thought that was a really stylish performance and one that augurs very well for the future.
Well, both those fillies have potential for the rest of the season. The Rockfell, the Fillies Mile, you'd imagine, will come into our remit. It'd be quite exciting to see what Fairy Cross, but in particular for my money, what Bright Diamond might do later on. And another winner for William Buick was on Huyamal in the March Stakes. Now, obviously, he's not the strongest race in the world. Well done to Connections of Pink Fire Lily for picking up just over $5,000 for just entering and running in the race. But let's deal with Huyamal as a live ledger contender. I think with Bet365, New London remains the 8-11 favourite. Huyamal available at 8-1. What sort of interest have you got?
Well, it was a marvellous piece of placing by Connections because they got 56,000 for little more than a routine hat count around Goodwood. I know he had to work reasonably hard to get past Perfect Alibi, but it would have achieved a great deal of targets really for them. And the parameters that they set going into the race were met by William Buick, really, who did very well in a very uncompetitive field to sort of get him 3/4 or 4/5 settled. He was a little bit keen, wasn't he? He didn't quite drop his head as he would have liked, but it was almost an impossible task in a race where you've got horses that really shouldn't have even been in the same field as him. So it was a nice stepping stone really towards the St Leger. I think a more orthodox track will perhaps suit him as well. I know he's handled Epsom well, he's handled Goodwood okay as well, but I'd like to see him on a nice flat galloping track. But you look at the race, 2 out of the 4 runners were playing up at the stalls and were difficult to load. The horse that finished third was sweating badly. It was a shocking affair really for the prize money, and understandable that the course executive wanted to perhaps revisit that race, but that won't bother Huyamal's Connections, who chipped 56 grand off the purchase price and move onwards, very serenely to Doncaster.
And if you had to pick a horse for the Leger now, and bearing in mind we'll be doing it next week, but right now, do you have any insight as to where your sentiment is heading towards for the Leger?
Difficult to say, because I've got a feeling that we might be in for a change in the seasons as we move towards Doncaster. So Town Moor might experience a little bit more rain than we've seen in about the last month. I think New London's a very worthy favourite. I think he's looked a class act this year. I think he's been brilliantly trained as well. He was some bet in that Newmarket handicap, and they made sure that he went unbacked. He wasn't unbacked, rather, the way that he won that race, and then has stepped forward subsequently. So I think he's going to be a difficult horse to lower his colours. But it's bubbling up. It'll be interesting to see the final field, and we look forward to getting our teeth into it with Johnny Ward next week.
Indeed. A brief and honourable mention to Tis Marvellous, the old boy who won the Beverley Bullet for the second year in a row. Paul Hannigan on board. I thought he was beat when Arecibo cruised up to him.
Yeah, he got a lovely toe into the race, didn't he, from King of Stars, who blazed away, and nothing really got into the race, did they? I mean, Tis Marvellous travelled just in behind. Arecibo was on the scene as well. And just in that last 150 yards, Paul Hannigan just got another effort from the old boy. As you say, that's 2 from 2, Paul Hannigan on him. He goes very well this time of the year as well, Tis Marvellous, and a brilliant training performance from Clive Cox to get him there in that shape. He's been a marvellous horse, really, as his name would suggest, both at Ascot and at Beverley. Those are 2 tracks which seem to suit him extremely well. And you wouldn't rule out a third bid, would you, next year?
Of course not, definitely not. The way he seems to love it there. And last thing, a very brief mention for poor Ross Coakley. I was going to say Ross Coakley in a positive way, because he rode Dubawi Legend to win that big sprint in Germany on the weekend, but picked up a 23-day ban for it. I mean, I've had one look at it on, in fairness, a social media video, and it does look rather harsh, that ban. And I think Hugo Palmer's also explained his reasons for thinking it's harsh. Have you seen it? Any thoughts on it?
I haven't had a chance to see it yet, Rich, unfortunately. So you're probably one step ahead of me, not for the first time here with this. But it's a real shame, because Ross Coakley has done exceptionally well this year with a couple of his unisons have started to really yield plenty of success, and he's really made a good name for himself, certainly in this country. I know James Millman's a big fan of him. He rides quite a few for Rob Millman's yard, and they use him whenever they can get him, because I think his feedback's excellent. I think he's a very talented rider as well. I think they've been very keen to get him on board as much as possible, and it's a shame that what was a red letter day for him has been tarnished with a 23-day ban. So, I mean, you could probably tell me a little bit more about the ride than I know, but yeah, from all accounts, it's extremely excessive punishment.
Exactly that. The accounts and the little that I've seen of the race suggests that he has been very, very harshly dealt with by the authorities in Germany. But I'm sure there'll be more on that in the coming days and weeks. Well, for the moment, that has been this week's Racing Recap. Well, the big race to look forward to at Haydock this weekend is the Sprint Cup. There are a number of good horses in the race, including last year's winner, Emirati Anna, who bounced back to form last time. Minzal for the Owen Burrows team, who is, we know that the Owen Burrows team flying, and Minzal's actually contributed quite well. And that's 4-1 joint favourite with Naval Crown, who, of course, won at Royal Ascot. Emirati Anna is into 7-1. Art Power, Rohan 8-1, 9-1. Kinross. That's all with Bet365. First thoughts, Sam, on the horses that are making the Turner shortlist.
Yeah, it's a great race, I think. Well, it's got the potential to be a very good race. I can understand why Minzal's favourite, obviously the Maurice de Guise form, was advertised royally in the Nunthorpe by Highfield Princess, who bolted up and had beaten him there. And yet another good runner from Owen Burrows' stable this year, another horse that's paying his way in rich and royal circumstance. Naval Crown, you can understand obviously the same form line, why he's migrated to the head of the market as well. So bookmakers are really keen, Bet365 are really keen on sort of promoting that form line. But I don't wonder whether it'll be quite as straightforward as that. And, I've got a feeling that last year's winner might give a good account as well, Emirati Anna. I quite like his chance at, the price that he is. I thought that was a real good comeback effort, or certainly a refined form effort at York in the Nunthorpe. I thought he finished his race off really strongly and back over 6, back to a terrain that he obviously adores and is very effective at. I thought that he would be certainly towards the top of my shortlist as we speak. What about yourself?
I like Art Power. He's run well in the race in the last 2 years. He was fourth 2 years ago. And then last year, he went off really hard out in front under Sylvester de Souza. And I thought actually about a furlong and a half out, he had quite a few of them in trouble. And then he just emptied out, which wasn't a surprise. And obviously emptied out against some good horses. But he had a lot of speedy horses off the bridle a long way from home. And he was, and in the end, he was fifth behind Emirati Anna. He's only had one run this year. And I thought that was a pretty good comeback run at York, over 7, not his trip. But again, he towed them along with a decent clip, probably raced a little bit freely. But now that freshness is out of him, he'll go back to Haydock, where I think, looking at the way the race is going to be run, he'll be out there in front at the price. I mean, he hardly has ever run a bad race, this horse. He's such a consistent performer. He's obviously got some good wins in Ireland, but I think he runs absolutely brilliantly at Haydock anyway. And he's 8-1. I thought I think he's barely finished out the first 4 in his career. I think 8-1, he's a cracking each way bet for me, Art Power, especially the fact he's going to be fresh, and I think that nice run at York would have just blown the cobwebs away, to coin a cliche. But apart from everything else, I think it's possible that he might be a better horse this year as well. Just watching him physically at York, he looked really well. It looked like he'd come on for the run. So I like Art Power each way in the race. I mean, Naval Crown, Minzal, you respect them on what they've done this season. Emirati Anna, you obviously respect what he did last season and suggest that he's going back in the right direction. Brad the Brief has had quite a good season. The one concern I'd have about Art Power would be if Brad the Brief went up alongside him. But I'm hoping that as long as Art Power settles in front, or settles near the head of affairs, it won't matter. Yeah,
and I think, without knocking Sylvester de Souza, although we can talk about him now he's disappeared off to Hong Kong, there was a little bit of a propensity sometimes in these races to absolutely gun horses from the front. I mean, it worked beautifully with Windsor Power in the Nunthorpe, but that was a track that serves speed, doesn't it? Serves it well. And I just think sometimes at Haydock over 6, you need to ride a little bit of a race where you're saving a bit for the death, because they do finish strongly and powerfully there. So hopefully David Allen can get the the fraction's right for you there. I presume he'll ride. He was on board, wasn't he, in the Renaissance Stakes at the Coa last year, where, I mean, he was absolutely, well, different class that day, wasn't he, in beating Twilight Spinner. It was a really tremendous performance, the way he moved through that race. And I think it's a really salient point you make about him being fresh as well. I think at this time of year, a number of these sprinters have been not round the block a bit, but they've been to war a few times, haven't they? And the fact that he's fresh and well, and this looks very much the target for him. And I think it's the target for Emiratiana as well. I think the Nunthorpe, a race that he ran really well in last year, admittedly, but it was a good stepping stone into Haydock for him last year, and I think that might be the case again. So I'm happy to stick with last year's form. I know, they are taking on a different class of horse in some respects this year, in the likes of Minz, Allen, Naval Crown, who are upwardly mobile 4-year-olds, and we may not have seen the best of them just yet. But I also thought Dragon Symbol would run quite well. I know he was probably in a good part of the track at York, in the slipstream of the winner that day, but I thought that he finished off okay over 5, and I just think he's screaming out for 6, and he's got plenty of Haydock form as well. So I thought at 20-1 or prices in excess of that, I thought he could possibly run very well depending on his draw.
Yeah, just going back to the point you were making about the pace that Sylvester went on Art Power last year in the race. He was bombing along so fast early part of the race. And he had horses that normally make, the likes of Glen Shields off the bridle 2 furlongs out just to stay in touch. And he was 3 lengths clear, travelling well. I think the Clive Cox horse Supremacy was also trying, shoved along to try and keep up with him. So he did go a hard enough clip. But the other point that you make about, this race and the history of it, Tim Easterby's won it a couple of times before with Somnus and Pipalong. I would imagine that, given everything, this has been a bit of a plan to have this horse ready at Cherry Ripe for this race, and that run at York has put him spot on for Art Power. But yeah, it is a very good race, and there are Dragon Symbols. I like what's happened to him this season, apart from obviously the early part where he didn't quite deliver, but. Roger Varian bit the bullet, sent in for a weak race at Hamilton, restored some confidence, and was much better in better company at York last time. So he's definitely one that I'll be wary of. Elsewhere in the weekend, anything else? I mean, the Superior Mile, I know that it's a classy race if Aldari runs in it, but if he doesn't, it's a little bit thin. But there are a couple of handicaps that are probably worth having a look at that I know that you quite like. Maybe 1 or 2 horses in.
I love the Old Borough Cup. I must admit, I'm a big fan of it, and it's just a great race. And I think those 2 sort of mile 6 handicaps, one for the 3-year-olds and one for the 3-year-olds and older horses. Solcombe obviously has an entry in both. He's gone up a stone for that York performance in the Melrose, where he was like a hot knife slicing through butter, wasn't he? The way that he's weaved in and out of his field there under Holly Doyle. Be interesting to see which engagement he takes up. I mean, even off 83 at York, he looked the potential pattern race performer in a handicap, didn't he? You could see it Goodwood the time before that events just conspired against him, and it was a good performance to get where he did. That slow start is going to hamper him a little bit as he goes up in grade. I know, even though he's racing over 1 mile and 6, and as he sort of stretches out as well, you don't want to be giving good class horses 4 or 5 lengths out the stalls. And they'll be off and away at Haydock as well. There's some pretty good horses in this race. You've got Old Yukon Glen, who I think, I know it typifies his career a little bit that he just hasn't had the rub of the green the last 2 starts. But I think at Goodwood 2 runs ago behind Trawlerman, and indeed at York behind Trawlerman as well in the E-Ball, where some of us backed Alfred Boucher and are still undergoing counselling. He's run extremely well on both starts. I thought the Goodwood performance, he was really unfortunate, but that's his come from behind tactical way of running, isn't it? And you're always going to meet a little bit of trouble. But I think he's running to an extremely good level at the moment, so I think I'd have him on side in some small way. And also, I still think there's a bit of upside in as well. His Contact, who we haven't seen since running at the July meeting at Newmarket. I thought he ran really well behind Soapy Stevens. I wasn't convinced that the track played to his strengths that day, but back at Haydock, where he impressed early on in the year, he was also third to Candleford as well. He couldn't live with Candleford over 1.5 miles, but I think if I had to frame a race for Contact, 1 mile 6 round Haydock would be absolutely perfect for him. I think Ben Curtis is already jocked up, and he's double figure price as well. So I think I'd probably play him each way and hope to get sort of 4 or 5 places from those very, very generous bookmakers, Bet365, closer to the time.
Well, if Solcombe runs, I mean, in racing, you occasionally see a performance where you think, I cannot wait to see this horse run again. And I know you mentioned about the slow start. I mean, he obviously did his usual thing at York. But the way he moved through the race and the way he's ridden with enormous amount of confidence by Holly Doyle, when they turned straight, you could tell he was going to win. I must admit, I didn't think he would win, even in the manner that he did. I could tell that he was travelling well and she was about to line him up to cut him loose. But my goodness, that was impressive. And I know he was off the bottom end of the handicap, but everything about the horse, pedigree, connections, and just the way he moves through a race, barring the start, you're thinking that this is potentially a pattern horse going through the grades and handicaps here. And as soon as he crossed the line, I wonder where they go next. I wouldn't have been surprised if, William Haggas thought about maybe having a dip at something. But I thought maybe something like this. He could have run something like, I don't know. He could have run something like the September Stakes. I don't know. Just throwing it out there because normally that cuts up. But actually, the September Stakes this year looks a much stronger race than it has been in terms of competitiveness. I think Dubai Honour from the Haggas team, Hamish is in there, Mostadaf. I quite like Hamish if he does run. He won the race last year, and he beat a certain horse called Huckham in the race last year, and that didn't turn out too bad. So if he did win the race, I'd chuck a couple of bets on him maybe.
Yes. Yeah, he's obviously got a brilliant record fresh, hasn't he? Like you say, he handles the track very well. They look to have that by the short and curlies again, don't they? The Haggas team. Yeah. Incredible, really, their strength in depth. And I think he's won after a 440-day break, a 185-day break. Very fragile horse, obviously. And I think the reason that he has to go on the all-weather these days is because they're that mindful of his glass-like legs. Bit like you, Rish, when you run in the marathon, you've got to, a lot of water training, a lot of swimming, and all that sort of stuff. You can't see you on the roads, and it's a bit the same with Hamish. They have to be really treat him with kid gloves and wrap him in cotton wool. But when we do see him, he's very good.
I do like a lot of cotton wool, Sam, just to protect these old bones. I don't know how many more marathons I've got in me, but I'll do my best. Was there anything else that you want to mention? Anything else you wanted to mention for the week ahead? I mean, it's all based, I think, around the weekend's action, Saturday's action.
The one point I was going to make on the Old Borough, the one point I was going to make on the Old Borough Cup as well, that as it stands at the moment, we've got a chance of seeing 3 of the previous winners in the race. We touched on Uke and Glen running. Rashoon, the 2018 winner, is in the entries, and last year's winner, Island Brave, is in there as well. So brilliant longevity from those 3. And I wouldn't have thought Island Brave's the worst 33-1 chance either. The stable struck with a big price winner at Sandown recently, and he obviously loves Haydock. Even at the ripe old age of 8, you could see him running above himself in that on Saturday.
All right. That's something to bear in mind. Sam, thank you for the moment. That has been our look ahead to the big racing this weekend. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Racing Weekly, brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. As always, it's been a pleasure to share the stage with my man, Sam Turner. Sam, I'm looking forward to catching up with you next week because we have got Johnny Ward coming into the studio and we'll be looking ahead to the St. Ledger. We touched on it today, New London, Eldorov, Secret State, Hu Yamal, amongst the main contenders for the race. So we'll be looking at that, maybe 1 or 2 other races as well, what promises to be actually quite a decent card, assuming some of the good horses turn up at Doncaster for the Ledger. If you like what you heard or watched in this episode or any of our previous episodes, then leave us a comment a kind comment on the review section in Apple Podcasts or in the comment section on YouTube. Thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully we've pointed you in the right direction with regards to the Sprint Cup at Haydock, and next week I'm almost certain that Sam and Johnny Ward will be doing that with regards to the St. Ledger. But for now, bye-bye.